Hello, I'm Rowan Hisayo Buchanan and I'm in the Kinokuniya in New York, and I'm going to read a little bit from my novel Harmless Like You that just came out. So the prologue is from a man's point of view, so you'll just have to imagine that my voice is a little bit low. Prologue, Berlin. The small female oblong stood in the shadows beyond the doorway. Sun buttered the sidewalk where I stood, but she was dressed for a colder season. 3 scarves wound around her neck, a russet, a cardinal, and a white with scarlet reindeer prancing along the weft. Guten Morgen, she said. It was the first time I'd seen a Japanese mouth shape the Germanic consonants. My German was too weak to know if her accent held the residue of Connecticut. Did the Saugatuck River flow along her vowels? Or did she speak as if she'd always lived in Berlin's history-scrambled streets? Yukiko Oyama? I dropped my half-raised hand to my side. You're expecting me. I've come about your husband's estate? Come in, my mother said. She showed no sign of recognizing me. She walked slowly, taking the banister, and irrational as it was, I wondered how someone so very small could be my mother. Her little hand clutching the iron rail appeared innocent as a child's. Then again, misdeeds don't swell the body. On impulse, I reached out. Her head was turned away from me. Just for a moment, I let my fingertips press into the forgiving wool of the reindeer scarf. Soft, very soft. Quickly, I pulled away. She took off her slippers by the front door and revealed layers of socks. She seemed older than 60, very spindly. The hair that dipped in and around the scarves was striped with long strokes of white. I'd once wondered what my life would have been like if she'd taken me with her. On the table, where a bouquet might go, a glass jar held a quiver of craft knives. The furniture was paint-spotted. A radiator thumped. Tea, she asked. Would you like some tea? I nodded. Empty jars filled the large enamel sink. On a hot plate, she set a pot to boil. She coughed. One hand pressed the base of her throat, while the other wrapped around her mouth. The crackling noise, like leaves being jumped on, continued for a full minute. Sick. Talking is difficult. Sorry. Her voice did sound rough, the end of each word scraped away. The folding plastic picnic chair creaked as I sat down. I wrapped my hands around the mug she gave me. It was green tea, the cheap kind that comes in bags. It always carries a slight bitterness. Still, the mug was warm in the cold. She left our family, and for what? This shabby room? As I said before, I'm here about Mr. Eve's estate. She looked down. Flecks of yellow sleep dust stuck in her eyes. Her fingers tugged at her scarf. You were married to him? Yes. He recently passed away? I waited for her to ask what of. She lifted her mug to the side of her face and rubbed it against her cheek. For heat, I assumed? He left you the house you lived in together. I pulled out the papers, pushing them across the paint-stained table toward her. I just need you to sign for the deeds. Do you have a pen? Of course, there'll be property taxes. I'd gone over this with a lawyer from my father's firm. But you'll probably want to sell the house. I'd be happy to put you in touch with an agent. So you'll have to sign here and here. She reached into her sweater's pocket and pulled out a black wax pastel. She aligned the papers, peering down to read the fine text. She signed her name slowly. Her signature was square, boxy, and careful. She passed me back the first sheet of paper, signed the second, and then stopped, the edge of the pastel still pressing into the page. She stared at her own name. My son, she asked? Yes, I thought, yes, yes. Where is he? So that's the end of the prologue.
So we have some questions for you. Can you talk a little bit about Harmless Like You and how it became a book for you?
So I knew that I wanted to write a novel, and I had an idea for a very, very different novel, and I sort of drew out a diagram, and I was like, this is going to be the novel. And it just wasn't working because it didn't have enough emotion in it, I think. And then my mother had a health scare. So what happened was, my mother lives in London and I was living in America at that time. And I got a call from my family going, Mommy doesn't know where she is or what day it is or how she got this bagel that she's eating, and we're taking her to hospital. And I was so scared because this is a person I love very, very much. And I couldn't help. I was in a different country. I couldn't keep calling because people were trying to deal with what was going on and to help her. So I was just sitting there at home because I'd canceled everything because I was too upset, thinking, who would I be without this person? Who would I be without my mother? Luckily, it turned out that she was fine, and what she had was something called TGA, which has stroke-like symptoms, but which you recover from completely. But at that, it left me thinking about who would I be without my mother? Who would I be without my mother? And my mother is a really amazing person who could have done lots of other things than be my mother. So she could have left. She just didn't want to. And so I started imagining this other woman, Yuki, who you heard a little bit about from the prologue. And I thought, this isn't an evil person. I imagined her as a teenage girl, and I thought, how would that teenage girl grow up to be a woman who left? And the novel sort of grew out of that.
Great. Can you tell us anything about the title, Harmless Like You, what it refers to, or is that something that you have to read the book to find out?
So I won't go into the full context, but at some point, another character in the book calls Yuki harmless, and she's really hurt and confused, and she doesn't quite understand what it means, because nobody wants to be called harmless, but the opposite of harmless is harmful, right? That's not something you want to be either. So there's this odd navigation in the book between different characters at moments they feel helpless, wanting to grab power, but then what happens when you hurt people by mistake, and do you want to be harmless or don't you want to be harmless?
Very good. You identify in your official bio as British, Japanese, Chinese, and American. What do you think race and identity mean today, both as personally and as a writer?
Okay, so to go into a little bit of why I identify as all those things, my grandfather on my mother's side is Japanese, or was Japanese, he's passed away, and my grandmother is Chinese, and then my father is British, but my mother grew up in America, and I'm an American citizen as well as a British citizen. So there's all of this jumble, and it is very important to me, and when I was writing this book, I found that I was writing not about my family, but inspired by some things in my family. So my mother grew up in New York in the 1960s and 1970s in a half Japanese, half Chinese family. And there are many books and many movies about New York at that time, but there are very, very few Japanese or Chinese families in those books. Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is a beautiful movie in many ways, has a terrible instance of yellowface, and that is one of the most famous depictions of an Asian person at that time. And so when I was writing Harmless, I wanted to put a family that isn't identical to mine, Yuki's family is entirely Japanese, into that time period.
Does the order of your identity change on a daily basis?
So I've been asked about this just by people in my life a lot, sort of what's most important to you, and I sort of think, well, where do I get this from? I get this is my family, these are the countries I've spent my life in, and I can't say, oh no, my Japanese grandfather is more important to me than my Chinese grandmother, or the other way around, but at certain points, different parts of your family history will be something you're thinking about or will be part of you, or sometimes you're not going around thinking about your identity at all, you're thinking, I'm hungry. So it felt silly to say this is the definitive order.
Right. You describe art in a luscious and visual way in Harmless Like You. Do you have an art background?
I do paint a little bit on the side for my own enjoyment, And I think because it makes me able to write better, because I look at the world more clearly and more carefully. And, you know, if I have an assumption, I draw the assumption, the picture doesn't look right. And I think that helps me try to avoid cliches and things.
Got it. If you weren't a writer, would you be an artist?
It's hard to imagine other lives, and that's obviously a very difficult path and very competitive, and there are so many very talented people, so I don't know what would have happened, but I think art would always have been part of my life in one way or another.
People always say, write what you know. What of Harmless Like You is you, and what is fiction? And how do you decide those distinctions? Tough question.
That is. So for me, and I think in the first question I sort of addressed this a little bit, the emotions always have to feel very real, even if the circumstances that have caused them aren't identical to my own, because I think you can research what does that building look like by going to it and seeing it, or asking questions, or looking at photographs, but I think it's very hard to depict an emotion without having felt it.
Good. What would you say is your writing process, and how much research do you factor into your writing?
It changes on what I'm trying to write about. With this book, a lot of the early research was just sort of family stories, was talking about that time, was trying to get a sense of it, talking to people who weren't in my family who'd lived in New York at that time. And then after I had a first draft, I went back and I was checking and I was trying to find out, you know, what was true. Like, was there a Japanese restaurant at that time? Was it an expensive one? You know, what was around? And so there were the questions I knew to ask, and there were also questions I didn't know to ask, where I just had to show the manuscript to other people. For instance, there's a scene where they're in a diner eating pasta, and I had written it that they were eating penne, because that's a very boring standard pasta, or it was in my childhood, but I found out that actually at the time you could probably only have got that in like a proper Italian restaurant, and that it was this really new, exotic, exciting thing. And I sort of changed it in the book to macaroni, but I now appreciate penne more when I eat it.
Great. Can you introduce any key characters and why they are important to the story without spoiling it?
Okay, so sort of the story alternates between Yuki, the artist in the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, as she's getting older. That's sort of told in the third person, but also the first person voice who you heard when I was reading the prologue is Jay, her son, and he has sections that are told in the present day. And I've talked a lot about Yuki, so I'll leave her, but he's just had his own child, and he's sort of trying to figure out how to be a parent as someone whose own mother left, and he doesn't like his child very much, and he doesn't know why. And so that's something he's trying to deal with. Meanwhile, he is quite fond of his bald therapy cat, and his wife hates his bald therapy cat, and she wants him to put it down. So he's also sort of trying to manage how he feels about the cat, and how he feels with the baby, and how he feels about the wife. And then he has to go meet this mother who left him, and so his sections are as he works through those issues.
Okay. How do you feel about the cover? Does it do a good job representing what the book is about?
I should definitely say yes, or my publishers would be very cross. No, I think it's very interesting. This book was first published in the UK, actually, a couple months before it was published in the US, and they have a different cover there, but they're both pictures of a woman's face with paint across it, and I have to say, I do like the fact that the paint is part of the book jacket. I was going to hold this up, but there's one there. And I like that it does allow you to imagine her face a little bit, because you can't quite see it.
Okay. That means yes, you like
yes,
it.
I do.
Okay, good.
I do.
And what are you working on next?
So I have a couple of things I'm doing at the moment. I have a novel that I won't talk about because it's far too messy and I don't want to jinx it. But I'm also editing an anthology for the Feminist Press and the Asian American Writers Workshop called Go Home, that has a bunch of different Asian and Asian American writers writing about the idea of home, including Chang Rui Lee and Alexander Chi and Mia Alvar, and I'm really, really excited about that.
Great. And one last question. You tell an incredible story about being hit by lightning in a recent NPR interview. Can you tell that story and what that impact had on you?
Okay, so when I was editing this book, and it was sort of my final edits, which my agent had read it through, and she'd told me to make these changes. I was staying in this barn in upstate New York that sort of is a writer's residency, and I've been kindly invited to. And it was nighttime, and it was summer, but it was a really, really rainy summer, and there were coyotes howling. It was very overwhelming, and the internet was a bit iffy, so I wasn't backing up my novel edits as much as I should have been. And I was sort of writing away with my headphones in, concentrating, when my vision went white, and I felt this incredible pain in the side of my face, and I didn't understand what had happened. But what had happened was lightning had hit the barn and gone through the fuse box, through the electrical system. It blew out one of the other residents' phone chargers and another one's laptop cable. But for me, it had gone up through my laptop cable, through my laptop, through the headphones, into the side of my face, which was not pleasant at the time. But because of that, nothing in my computer went wrong, I think, because I grounded the electricity. And after I got over the pain, I was very grateful because I really didn't want to lose those edits. And I've always sort of felt like the lightning helped the novel, maybe.
Great. Okay, Rowan Hisayo Buchanan, Harmless Like You. Thank you very much for coming to Kinokuniya New York.
Thank you.